Kansas, the land of the south wind, a mysterious chapter in American history. Kansas, a name that echoes across the vast, whispering plains of North America. Bounded by Nebraska to the north, Missouri to the east, Oklahoma to the south, and Colorado to the west, this unassuming heartland hides a past as windswept and haunting as the prairies it rests upon. Rising with the terrain of the Great Plains, Kansas officially became the 34th state of the Union on January 29, 1861. But long before statehood, long before Topeka was chosen over Lawrence as the capital by a narrow margin, this land pulsed with secrets. Its very name, Kansas, comes from the Kansa, or Kaw people, a Siouan language phrase meaning people of the south wind. A name carried not just by geography, but by centuries of movement, conflict, and quiet resilience. Ancient echoes and forgotten settlements. Long before settlers arrived with iron plows and paper maps, Kansas was alive with indigenous civilizations. Archaeologists have unearthed the remnants of a flourishing agricultural society nestled along the Republican and Big Blue rivers. From roughly AD 1200 to 1500, these people built homes, cultivated land, and lived in harmony with the cycles of the earth, until, mysteriously, they vanished. By the 1500s, the permanent villages were abandoned. The echoes of daily life faded, replaced by the movements of migratory tribes. What drove them away? Was it drought? Or something else entirely? El Cordelio, the northernmost Pueblo ruin in North America, sits near Scott City like a crumbling whisper of this forgotten past. Few know it exists. Fewer still understand its significance. But it stands, silent, enduring, a ghost of the people who once shaped this land. The gold that never was, Coronado's misguided quest. Then came the Spanish. In 1541, Francisco Vázquez de Coronado rode northward from Mexico, lured by rumors of the mythical seven cities of gold, Cibola. His journey brought him deep into the Kansas terrain. With him came Juan Padilla, a priest determined to spread Christianity in a land not asking to be saved. Padilla is believed to have founded the first mission here, somewhere near what is now Wichita. But neither gold nor glory awaited them. Instead, they left with stories of empty lands that hid ancient secrets. Kansas offered no riches, only mystery. And perhaps that was more powerful. The tug of empires. In 1682, the French explorer René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, claimed this land for France, sweeping Kansas into the larger saga of colonial ambition. Throughout the 18th century, French fur traders developed a thriving relationship with the Kansas Indians in the northeastern hills. Goods were exchanged. Trust was cautiously built. And again, the land bore silent witness to human ambition. Spain briefly laid claim to Kansas during this time, its eyes on expansion. But their dreams ended in a fierce battle, one that took place not here, but in neighboring Nebraska. It was a short-lived, brutal affair. Spain surrendered its hopes, leaving Kansas in a liminal space between empires and destinies. Bleeding borders, Kansas in the eye of the storm. In 1803, Kansas changed hands again, this time not by blood, but by bargain. Through the vast sweep of the Louisiana Purchase, the United States acquired the region. Yet what was gained on paper remained misunderstood on the ground. When the explorer Zebulon Montgomery Pike journeyed through Kansas in 1806, he described the land as the Great American Desert. A harsh label, an inaccurate one. But like many false names, it stuck. And so, Kansas became a corridor, explored, surveyed, yet overlooked. Settlers and miners, lured by the promise of gold and fertile lands further west, passed through without settling. The wind continued its quiet dance over untouched fields, hiding what was to come. From 1830 to 1854, this region was designated Indian Territory. It became the forced refuge of indigenous tribes removed from their ancestral lands further east. A government promise, fleeting and fragile. Many of those displaced people were again uprooted, this time to what is now Oklahoma. Kansas became a holding space, never intended as a home, always a temporary exile. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 shattered that illusion of stillness. It carved two territories from the wilderness and threw open the gates of settlement. But there was a darker clause. The residents of each territory could decide for themselves whether slavery would be permitted. And so the storm gathered. What followed was not migration. It was a race, a battle of ideologies, fought not on the battlefield, but across prairies, cabins, and voting booths. Pro-slavery Missourians, known as border ruffians, surged into Kansas, determined to shape its destiny. From the north came the free staters, abolitionists, and settlers who envisioned a land free of human bondage. Eastern Kansas became the crucible of a brewing national war. The sacking of Lawrence in 1856 revealed just how fragile peace had become. Southern guerrillas descended upon the town, looting, burning, threatening to silence its anti-slavery voice. But the fire they lit only spread further. Soon after, the abolitionist John Brown, with his sons and a handful of followers, exacted a chilling revenge. In the dead of night, 5 pro-slavery men were dragged from their homes and executed. The ground near Pottawatomie Creek ran red, and America took notice. Brown's act was not forgotten. To the north, he was a prophet. To the south, a terrorist. And to Kansas, he was a symbol of what the territory had become, a battlefield without borders. The violence did not end there. Guerrilla skirmishes, vigilante justice, and political sabotage plagued the territory. The soil was rich with conflict, and the name it earned, Bleeding Kansas, was no exaggeration. It was the proving ground of the coming Civil War. From bleeding ground to Union soil, the statehood of Kansas. In 1861, amid fire and fury, Kansas was finally admitted to the Union, not as a land of compromise, but as a declaration. It entered as a free state, a defiant answer to the nation's growing fracture over slavery. But statehood did not bring peace. It brought war. As the American Civil War ignited, Kansas, a territory forged in ideological battle, stood firm with the Union. 2/3 of Kansas men of military age enlisted, answering the call with a determination born from years of local conflict. By the war's end, nearly 8,500 Kansans were dead or wounded, a staggering toll that made Kansas the state with the highest casualty rate in the Union relative to its population. Yet even as the Civil War raged, another, older struggle persisted. Before and after the war, sporadic and often brutal clashes continued between settlers and native tribes. In 1867, a fragile peace was negotiated. The United States promised homes, money, food, and clothing in exchange for tribal lands. The land sold was in Kansas. The land promised was in what is now Oklahoma. But when the tribes returned, expecting promises fulfilled, they found their ancestral lands occupied by white settlers. The treaty had been signed and broken. What followed was more bloodshed. Skirmishes flared across the plains like sudden prairie fires. The last Indian raid came in 1878, closing a tragic chapter of betrayal and broken words. Life on the edge, struggle and survival. The dream of Kansas was never easy. The wooded east offered settlers the means to build log cabins, but farther west, there were no trees, only sky and soil. Sod houses and dugouts became shelters against the wind, against the silence, against the unknown. And the unknown was cruel. Unpredictable weather, unrelenting droughts, sudden Indian raids, choking dust storms, and even plagues of grasshoppers, all turned promise into despair. Many who arrived in search of a better life abandoned it, swallowed by a land that did not forgive weakness. But not all. One figure emerged from this hardship, a man whose name would echo quietly through history. William Mathewson, known as the original Buffalo Bill, became a lifeline for starving settlers. With no expectation of reward, he hunted buffalo through an entire winter, bringing meat by the wagon load. He asked for nothing, but he gave everything: the iron rails and the rise of cow towns. In the late 1860s and 1870s, the railroads came, iron lines that carved across the prairie like veins of industry. One by one, small villages became rowdy cow towns, alive with the thunder of hooves and the clang of spurs. Cattlemen from Texas drove vast herds northward, seeking the railheads that dotted Kansas: Caldwell, Wichita, Dodge City, Ellsworth, Newton. Abilene. Each name carried a legend. Each town a boom and a bust. The Cowtown era was as intense as it was brief. It lasted less than a decade, but it burned into the national imagination, a romantic image of Kansas that still lingers today. Gunslingers, gamblers, cattle drives, saloons, and under it all, a state still finding its soul. Seeds from afar, the Volga Germans and the Golden Harvest. In 1874, new settlers arrived, carrying not just hopes, but heritage. They were Volga Germans, descendants of 18th-century German farmers who had once answered Catherine the Great's call to settle in Russia. Now, fleeing renewed persecution, they brought trunks filled with more than clothing or keepsakes. Inside were hand-selected grains of Turkey red wheat, a resilient, high-yield winter variety that would change Kansas forever. Among these settlers were many Mennonites, people of deep faith and disciplined agricultural traditions. With their wheat, their knowledge, and their endurance, they transformed the prairie into a breadbasket. Turkey red wheat took root and thrived, becoming the backbone of Kansas's winter wheat economy. Today, many of their descendants remain prosperous, quiet stewards of the land, still harvesting what their ancestors once sowed. Boom, dust, and war. Kansas in the 20th century. By 1890, Kansas was no longer a land of open frontier. The land was claimed, fenced, and plowed. The people turned inward, their lives increasingly defined by agriculture. Then came World War I, and with it, a massive demand for food. Every inch of prairie seemed to be tilled and put to work. Prosperity returned, but at a cost. The earth, pushed beyond its limits, began to turn. The 1930s brought the Dust Bowl, and Kansas suffered deeply. Storms blackened the skies. Crops failed. Towns withered. The promise of abundance vanished into dust. Then came World War II, and with it, a new chapter. No longer only a land of wheat, Kansas began to rise in the skies. Wichita became a hub for aircraft manufacturing. People flooded in from Oklahoma and Arkansas, seeking work in the booming factories. The wind still swept across the plains, but now it carried the roar of engines and the sparks of industry. The long transition, modern Kansas. Through the 1970s and 80s, Kansas grew, slowly, steadily. Unemployment remained low. More Kansans found work in mining, healthcare, and service industries. Though it lagged behind fast-growing neighbors like Colorado, Kansas carved a quieter, more deliberate path forward. By the 1990s, the economy diversified, but the state's identity remained deeply tied to its rural roots. Politics and new voices. Kansas has long been a Republican stronghold, its conservative voice echoed through national halls of power. But the state has never been static. Over the past few decades, Democratic influence has grown, especially at the state level. Part of this shift comes from changing demographics. New waves of immigration, especially from Mexico and Central America, have breathed life into once declining western towns. These communities have reshaped the cultural fabric of Kansas. In cities and small towns alike, vibrant enclaves have formed. Spanish echoes through markets and homes. New traditions rise alongside old ones. Kansas is still Kansas, a land of wheat and wind, of pioneers and promise. But it is no longer only a tale of the past. It is a living story, still unfolding. Love the untold stories of American history? At History Love, we dig deeper. From forgotten battles to cultural revolutions, from ancient trails to modern transformations, this channel is your place to explore history with heart, depth, and mystery. Subscribe now, hit the bell, and share this journey through time. Every state has a story. Kansas just happens to have more than most. Next stop? You decide.